Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome you here, and we're working out technical difficulties, but this is going to give me a good chance to make a few remarks before we really get into the presentation. Again, welcome, and thank you for coming. We had 200. If everybody showed up, which we are close to that, 250 people registered for this event. We, just as an aside, and I'll ramble a little bit here, but Bill Murphy and myself 3 years ago started this speaker series. As a matter of fact, Paul Iannini is here with us. He was our first speaker when we really got into COVID. But we have other programs coming up this year in February, March, and April. So we will have 15 speaker events. In those events, we've had 600 plus people like yourselves that have attended these events. That represents almost half Mariner Sands community, which is terrific. So based on this, we keep gathering information so that we can pass back to you our next event. And I'll preempt what Gary would say at this point. He'll say it at the end. But our next event in February is on the remarkable life of Henry Fowler and the railroad and what that did for the state of Florida. So that's the 13th of February, and you'll get information about that, but that should be a great program as well. At this point, I'll have to wait to introduce you to our really guest speaker, who is a retired Navy SEAL gentleman. He's actually now the assistant director of the museum up in Fort Pierce, Navy SEAL Museum. But we'll have more information. Gary actually will do the formal invitation to that. But I know Gary and Glenn Cooper, who's our guest featured speaker, I want to, on behalf of all of us here, really thank them for their service to our country. Glenn is 33 years in the Navy, retired now. Gary is 40 years in his service to the Army. 30, somehow I got, he said 31. Well, so he's just a young guy, whatever. One of the things, while they're working on a technical part here, gives me the opportunity to say something about Gary. I don't want to preempt our major speaker, but most of you, I'm sure, don't know what Gary has done in his life, the 31 years, I guess, in the service. He's a highly decorated chaplain in the service. And if I was to go through all the things he's done, I would probably take 5 minutes just to read that off. But there's a couple of things that I think you'd be interested to know, the breadth of his involvement as a chaplain in the service. First of all, and he didn't want me to say this, but I know he's fluent in 5 languages. I'm sure he's conversant in more than 5 languages because he has been deployment for the service in 51 countries around the world. God bless Karen for being with him at that point. A couple of key things to understand the breadth of his involvement. And again, this gives me the opportunity while they're trying to do the the AV here. But one of the things that he, in his life, he managed 5 groups, I guess, of other chaplains that really served 25,000 people in the military. So Gary was the guy that really made that happen and had a team of 5 teams that covered those 45,000, 25,000 plus the families. So he would serve that, which gives you pretty much the extent of his involvement there. One of the things that he and I talked about today, in the year 2006, in Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah were at war. Things are no different today. But at that point, Gary was assigned to help to evacuate 14,000 U.S. citizens. And the comment I would make about that, I think the Biden administration could have used him in Afghanistan. But that was a very tense time that he oversaw that whole situation and then had the opportunity, obviously, to evacuate those people without incident. That's something that we never heard about, really, but it's part of his legacy, I guess, in the military. The other thing to know before we get started, maybe, I don't know, Glenn, are you making progress?
I think so. I don't know where Gary went, though, but I think that happened.
Okay. Well, another thing, just to be aware, and this just happened in the last week. Gary just returned from Washington, D.C. He is the chairman of the National Conference on Ministry for the Armed Services. It covers, obviously, all of armed services. This is a group of leaders in churches in this country, all denominations. Could be Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Buddhist, Islamic congregations all over the country. So there's 200 of these people, and Gary is the chairman of that group and just came back from D.C. He also has represented, obviously, the churches in the country in Congress and has made presentations in Congress for that. So just gave me an opportunity to kind of fill you in with the breadth and extent of Gary and why he has been really decorated as probably one of the best chaplain people in all of the services. So Gary, thank you for your service. Well, maybe we can all sing. Gary can sing. You wouldn't want to hear me. I'm gonna step ahead to something we would say at the end of the presentation, but I'm trying to create, the time here, and when they're ready, we'll go. But one of the things we wanted to know as a result of tonight's presentation, many of you know of the Navy SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce. And what I wanted to do is get an expression, no commitment, but how many people, by a raise of hands, would be interested if I worked with Glenn to organize a special Mariner Sands program up at the Navy SEALs Museum. It may involve a bus if people want to do that. But how many people would be interested if, just give me a raise of hand, that would want to do something if we put something together? All right, so what will happen is I will work with Rick Dorsey and Morris, and we'll do a communication and highlights and happenings. And in that program, we'll also indicate, what that program is all about. I don't know if there's any donation that goes to the museum if we did something. Can we do wine and cheese and hors d'oeuvres and whatever? So we'll work together. There's enough interest to put something together, and then just see if there's what commitment we get seriously. The other part of, and I'm preempting now what Gary would be saying, but that's fine. He could just at the end adjourn you all and won't say these things. But the other thing to be aware of is Bill Murphy and I are doing a survey on the Mariner Sands Chapel Speaker Series. And what that is really asking you folks any input, topics you'd like us to explore, people that you may know. There are people in this that you know as friends, or even some of you would like to present something and just come back to us. So look for the survey. It'll come out in highlights and happenings, and this could be weeks down the road once we put that all together. But when you get that, see that, would appreciate your input. So a lot of the input for that is really if you know topics and speakers or friends. If you recall last spring, we had Jimmy Dunn. Jimmy Dunn today is on the board of the PGA, but he was very involved with the PGA and the ALIV, the two professional organizations, somewhat in conflict of each other. But in that case, he was a very good friend of Dick Olstein here that really brought Dick to us. So if something like that comes to mind, that is something that we look for in the survey. We also are interested, we have topics, and we just like your input based on whether it's high interest or low interest of the topics that we have in that survey. So this is really something that will help the the speaker series moving forward years ahead. Thank you. How are we doing? Well, next Tuesday. Again, all I would say is we're thrilled with the turnout tonight. We have, I'm sure, close to 250 people. The weather may have held some people back. Are you okay? All right. What? Yeah. Hey, Bob? The chapel is much more than just a religious entity for Catholics and Protestants. And so we do the speaker series, which you're all part of. And Bob is very instrumental in concerts that we do. So there are several concerts coming up, and while we had the time, just tell them what's going on.
He started it next Tuesday, the 23rd. Piano duo, spectacular couple, married couple, who can play the piano together. They're coming again, and we'd love to have you come. It is going to be a much different kind of event because they're classical pianists, but we'd love to have as many people turn out as possible for that as well.
What else you?
Oh yeah, well, Constantine is coming back. Constantine is on the Juilliard faculty, and he was here last year to a full house. Had a great time with them, and then that's February 14th, and on March the 7th, classical guitarists from twins, Australians from Juilliard also. They're on a 13-week Australian tour right now, so they couldn't be here in January. But they're going to be here not only for classical music, but for Spanish music. And they also do, we understand from what they've told us, the Johnson brothers, they do Beatle music too. So it's going to be sort of like a sing-along at the end. So, but most importantly, the first event is next Tuesday, and we've got people sitting behind us now. That's good.
Hand the mic to him. Good. All right. Yeah.
All right, so we're ready to go.
All right.
We don't have to wait another
Hey,
week.
good evening, everyone.
My role here is really to introduce Gary, but it gave me the chance while they were working on this to give you kind of a perspective of what Gary has done. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary to really formally introduce Glenn, who obviously our feature speaker, and we're thrilled that he's with us.
Sure. You just put it right in there if you want. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for being here. We have some technical difficulties because the file format of the slides, for some reason, is not compatible with our computer and our projector when you put them all together. Sorry about that. We'll try to find some way to fix it, but not going to happen in the next 5 minutes, so we figured, let's just talk. And let's just talk about the Navy SEAL, UDT SEAL Museum up at Fort Pierce. Whatever Lee told you about me, just take it with a grain of salt. I don't know why he said all those things. About half of them are true. So I'm just Gary, and I'm just glad to be here, and I'm the minister here at the chapel, and I want to welcome you here. Tonight, our special speaker is Chief Warrant Officer Glenn Cooper from the UDT SEAL Museum up in Fort Pierce. And Glenn and I got to know each other about, several months ago, and during my visit up there, and just a great guy. He's going to tell about his time on active duty with the Navy SEALs. As Lee may have alluded to, I was busy thinking of other things, so I didn't hear him, but I spent some time as a chaplain with Naval Special Warfare back in the late 80s and 90s. And back then, at that time, the ministry to Navy SEALs was fairly simple. I was the only guy for all the teams around the world. So I traveled to 3 different continents from time to time to go visit those who were out and about deployed in different countries. And then I was stationed, my home base was at Little Creek, Virginia on the East Coast, where I had SEAL Teams 2, 4, and 8, and then also SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2, and then the special warfare units that were out and about in different places around the country, and then also the explosive ordnance disposal groups, disposal teams, EOD Mobile Unit 2 and 4 and 8 and 10, and those are like the bomb squads of the Navy. And so during that time, I was able to have a lot of fun. I was 40 pounds ago. I was really in good shape back then, and it was very memorable. One of the things I can say is that those who are serving in Naval Special Warfare and other special forces with the different branches, they're athletes in their own right. They work out a tremendous athletic regimen. They are morally upright. They have deep faith in God. I say that they have a deep faith because they're bumping into God every day at work. They're getting very close, and so it's a great opportunity to talk to them about things that matter. Chaplains, now that it's many years later, there are more teams than there were back then. And they have, I think, Glenn, they have 6 or 7 chaplains now serving with,
Let me test this mic. Does that sound good?
yeah.
Okay, so I mean, at some commands, there's actually, the last command that I was at, they actually have 3 chaplains and probably about 4 or 5 religious petty officers with them.
Yeah, so now they have a number of chaplains around the world helping and doing ministry to those groups. But this isn't really about the ministry, that was just my role. I'm not a wannabe SEAL, I didn't try to be one. I was just glad to be able to talk to them about eternity and about the things that really matter. And also, one of the things that chaplains do is help them provide counseling for their strained marriage relationships and family relationships, as well as discussing philosophical things about the type of work that they do. Special warfare is a very unique, up-close and personal kind of contact. There are different missions for the SEALs that Glenn may talk about. Several of them that you're familiar with is like counterterrorism, direct action, foreign internal defense. These are certain missions that when SEALs deploy to other countries, they have unique mission profiles or targets or accomplishments, tasks that they have to accomplish. And they stay right there and they work with other forces, either the Army, the Navy, Air Force, Marines. There are special forces groups with all of those services as well. They dovetail together. They come under one unified command called Special Operations Command. It's out of MacDill Air Force Base here in Tampa, Florida. That 4-star general oversees all special forces units as a combatant commander for everything in the world. So when the president wants to pull a chain and say, I need special forces somewhere, the Special Forces or Special Operations Command will design that package to say, well, is this something that should come from the air? Is it something that should come from the sea? Is it something that should come from the land? And they look at the profile of where this mission is and what is the best unit. That all comes from a result of back in 1979, there was a passage of a law called the Goldwater-Nichols Act. And if you remember in 1979, I was in Diego Garcia at the time, and that was when we had special forces go into Iran to rescue the hostages in Tehran, if you remember. And it ended miserably with many people dying the helicopters crashing and sandstorms and C-130s and lots of mess. And as a result of the Goldwater-Nichols Act, Congress decided you shouldn't have the different branches of the military competing with one another for these missions. You should have one unified commander who can spell out what is the relationship and what is the role of each of the special units. And so each of the different forces have unique skill sets that dovetail to one another. So sometimes air is the more important point. If it comes from the sea or from ships, then that's probably going to be Navy. If it's something within a Marine base or a Marine package, that's how the Marines use it. I hope I'm not boring you all. I'm going to get to the important part now. I'm going to talk to you about what this great museum is up in Fort Pierce. It has lots of different artifacts. Glenn's going to talk to you about that. And it's a great experience to come on up and see it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you the executive director of the Navy UDT SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce, Chief Warrant Officer Glenn Cooper, and his wife Cheryl is here tonight as well. Glad to have Cheryl.
Thank you, Gary. So I guess instead of coming and eating dinner with Gary, I should have been in here trying to fix this computer system.
Yeah, that would have been
So,
good.
and I'm truly sorry about that. I will have to use a little bit of this to guide myself. So bear with me a little bit with that when we do it. So to start this off, I'll give you my background and kind of give you an idea why I came in to be a SEAL and then my career as I did it. And then I'll get into somewhat of the museum and what we do and the function of the museum is. So when I was 18, after I graduated high school, I was working with my brother at a company. It was called the Foxborough Company, and we were powder coating instrument panels in this very hot oven. And we did this from 3 o'clock in the morning to like 10 o'clock in the morning, and then that was our 8-hour day. And I think that he didn't have to do 8 hours. I think we did like 7 hours, 6.5 hours to compensate. And this was the whole summer of as I graduated high school, and I had this one other gentleman that did a short stint in the Army, and he was a tank driver. And he said, and he told me one day, he goes, hey, if I was, and this is 1980, he goes, if I was to go back in the military, I'd be a Navy SEAL. And at that time, I had no idea what that was. I mean, and I don't think a lot of people did back then. And so one day I was interested, I looked it up, you didn't have the computer, so I found a magazine, and it had a picture of guys, you know, sitting on a beach in shorts, no shirt on, and it looked like the Bahamas or somewhere, and they had a big explosion in the back, and it was a place where I could jump out of an airplane and I could dive underwater and not pay for it, which I couldn't afford to do as a young kid. So that obviously inspired me, and so I went to the recruiter and went down there, and they did, as we all know, try to bamboozle you, and they told me that, he goes, Glenn, he goes, it's a tough program, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign you up for the submarine force, and that way if you don't make it through BUD/S, you could be a diver on a sub. And I'm thinking, okay, makes sense to me, until I got to boot camp, and they told me, if you're a nuclear power or submariners program, you could not try out for BUD/S. So what I did do is I didn't say anything, and I passed the test, and I was able to get in and go straight to BUD/S. So luckily for me, that worked out, but it was trying to probably fill some recruiter's, his billets that he needed to fill, and I was one of those guys, and fortunately it didn't work out for him, and it worked out for me.
From time to time, I might interrupt Glenn, only to say that BUD/S is the initial training for SEALs. It's called Basic Underwater Demolition Team SEAL Training, or SEAL School. That's what it's called, BUD/S. So.
Yeah, and now, please, if anybody has a question while I'm talking, just hit me up, please. And yeah, and I do, and I just told us that any acronym, I'd explain it first. So hit me up, Gary, every time I do that. So I ended up going there in 1981. I went through class 117. I was lucky. I was from New England. I went through in the winter, and I made it through in my 6 months. A lot of times guys don't do that. I'll get into some like statistics of BUD/S, like how many people go through and how many make it, and some of the courses and the phases that you have. So I was very fortunate. And then my first assignment, they gave you options. You know, they asked you, hey, what teams do you want to pick? What team do you want to go to? And I lived on the East Coast, so I had a choice of the West Coast teams or the East Coast teams. So I wanted to stay in the West Coast because I kind of like California. Even though the water's cold, it was beautiful. So I've decided I'll do SEAL Team 1, then I tried SEAL Team 2, and I did Underwater Demolition Team 11 because they were still in existence then. And I got my third choice, so I went to Underwater Demolition Team 11. And the one unique thing about what people don't realize is I graduated with 15 guys in my class. I think 5 went to SEAL Team, 1 or 2, and the rest of us went to a UDT team. And as simple as you graduating through the schoolhouse with everybody together, the guys that went to SEAL Team, they thought less of you because you were an Underwater Demolition Team. And it was just, even though you were side by side with that person, they thought differently because you weren't a SEAL. And they looked at that even back in the early 60s when it was, was inception by, John F. Kennedy decided the Green Berets and SEALs were going to come around, 1962. A lot of people thought that the UDT guys that didn't sign up for SEAL teams, they weren't paying the full load. They weren't carrying the whole weight. So it still lasted. The good thing is by the time I got to UDT 11, it was 1982. My first deployment, when I got back, UDT 11 turned to SEAL Team 5. They decommissioned all the UDT teams, and now they were all SEAL teams. So, and there was a huge change in training too. When I was an underwater demolition team, I did a lot of stuff like they did in World War II. We did the lead line and slate, and we did for the amphibious landings. I was a lifeguard at a lot of beaches when they did these amphibious landings. So in case somebody got hurt or was drowning or something, we were the lifeguards and we would swim out there and grab them. Did a lot of diving too, also with underwater demolition team. But then as soon as I got to the SEAL team, then you started shooting the guns, and you started doing the land warfare stuff, and you started doing close quarter battle, which is clearing buildings like a chapel or something with people. So it was good that I was in UDT now, because I can say I was an underwater demolition team, where a lot of guys can't say that, but I'm glad it changed to SEAL team. And I did that, so I did 3 deployments on the West Coast. And that was the 1 UDT and 2 SEAL platoons. At that time, we deployed to the Philippines, and a lot of that was jungle warfare stuff. And then after I got down my 3rd platoon, I screened and went to SEAL Team 6, and I went to a team called Gold Team. They're called squadrons now, but I went to Gold Team. And during that time frame, we did go to Just Cause in Panama, and what our job was to go was to find Noriega, Manuel Noriega, the guy that everybody was looking for. And the crazy thing about that is when we landed in Panama, these were our bases. So, I mean, we landed a bunch of planes in there. So obviously it had to spike the people in the country, especially Manuel Noriega. And the thing was what I think to this day that baffles me, and it was an intelligence thing, was this Manuel Noriega was in a parade the afternoon before the night of the invasion. So we knew where he was in this town of Cologne, or we thought we did. We would have thought that you could attract this guy. But as soon as it happened, and we did the invasion that night, and we couldn't find him. And then all of a sudden he hid out for a while, and then eventually everything came to a closure. But it was to my amazement that we didn't get him. And I'll tell another story later on as my career goes through. Another one of those same scenarios, like, wow, really? How did we miss this? But we did that. So during that time frame, once Just Cause ended, I came back, and then I took an assignment at Basic Underwater Demolition School. I became an instructor. And I was the first phase instructor, which that means that's the first phase, which is kind of the place where you have the most attrition. You lose the most of people, because it's where our crucible is Hell Week. And that's on the 4th week while you're in first phase. And back then, first phase was 8 weeks long. So I was fortunate enough that I put 18 classes through Hell Week. I had classes 170 to 188. And that was from 1990 to 1993. And I will say, if somebody goes through Hell Week in the winter, it is definitely harder than it is in the summer. Just so you know, it's cold, and obviously the nights are longer, and the water temperature's colder, and the sun's never really out at all as much. So I always say, like, when I talk to people, back then you could tell if you went through a winter class or a summer class. So I always thought it was kind of amusing when people would say they had a really hard buds class and it was in the middle of summer. But that's my viewpoint. So when I get done with buds as an instructor, I went back to, they had changed things, but I went back to Red Team. I didn't go back to my original SALT team, which was Gold Team. I went back and came back and went to Red Team. And like I said, they're all called squadrons now. I did that for about 3 more years and went to a special projects. It was kind of, back in the day, there wasn't a lot of wars going on for the first 20 years of my career. So, I mean, so we were looking for things to do. So what we would do is we would go and we would support the State Department. We would go to these high-risk posts. Like, we would go to Beirut, Lebanon. We would go to Algiers. We would go to, we did the Bosnia thing. So we did any place where we thought there was danger. We would go and we would support the State Department. And this way we would have access to these locations to understand the lay of the land, if we had to support a team to come in, we would know exactly how to get them to point A and point B. And really and truly in all these countries, our biggest concern is our own embassy. So we were basically part of that staff. And that was something that was an intriguing thing for guys with nothing else to do. So And then, after that tour, I became a warrant officer, and when you become a warrant officer, you become more of a trainer, or you oversee training, not so much you're a trainer anymore. So my wife and my family, we moved to Puerto Rico and went to a unit called Unit 4. Well, during that time, obviously, 2001, 9/11 happens. So when 9/11 happens, I've already got 21 years in the teams. So really my days of what we call assault is door kickers, where you kick in the door and you come in and you take bad guys out. Well, my days are pretty much over doing that. So a lot of my things that I did after 9/11 was more in a supportive role to ensure that our folks, or our team guys, would have the right assets, would have, and what I mean by assets, I'm talking about like the aircraft to provide you the fire support, or the overhead drones that could fly over and cover your position as you're driving around. And it was all a competition with the Army and everybody else, and it was whoever had the most valuable target that night would be the one that probably got the best sets of assets. You know, they'd have the more planes, more helicopters, and they'd have the better ISR out there. So my very first tour, and this is where I go back to that thing in Panama about why we couldn't get a hold of Noriega the first night or two, is I'm in Afghanistan, and our guys come back off a mission. And it was a daytime one, so it wasn't, a big nighttime mission. It was more like almost a reconnaissance mission, but it was for a compound. So they went up, and a couple of my buddies came back after me and told me what they had done. They had got up on this wall, and they were overlooking this compound. And this compound, had, families running around, kids running around, and it was fact finding. They were trying to find what kind of intel they could get. And the craziest thing is one of these young boys came up to the two guys that were standing on the wall, and they were looking. And he's like, and this kid spoke English in Afghanistan, which was kind of broken English, but he spoke English, which was to their amazement. And so this one kid goes, "Who are you looking for?" He asked our guys. And this is 2004, and one of our guys goes, "Osama bin Laden." And the young kid said, he goes, "He's not here, he's in Pakistan." So in 2004, a young kid in Afghanistan knew where Osama bin Laden was. So I always find that as humorous. So yes, I did that. I came back after I got done with my tour. At my very last tour, well, not my second last tour, I did a couple more deployments. I did go to Iraq. I did go to Pakistan, and that was in support of what I did in Afghanistan. And this was all before we got bin Laden. And a lot of it was to support, because we had a good idea, even though the young kid said that, we had a good idea where we knew where he was. So we needed to get people into Pakistan one way or the other. And one of my jobs it was kind of more like you used a vehicle that they have, like, instead of having semi-trucks in Afghanistan or in Pakistan, they have these things called Jenga trucks. And they're big, almost like a big dump truck, but they have their own personal touch to it. And what we did was we kind of made them into Trojan horses. And a lot of times we put technological stuff we would send these Jenga trucks into Pakistan and find routes and look for things to see where we could find, hopefully, bin Laden. And if we ever had to insert guys, how could we do it, And it was a unique program that we had. We never had to use it, thank God, because I used stealth helicopters later on to go in and get them. So that was kind of my last tour. And then my very last tour that I did, I was the training officer at the schoolhouse, at Buds again. So of all the training, the fundamental training, the foundation training that we give our guys, their initial training that they get, I was the training officer, so I oversaw all that. And what I find is it had changed a lot. Even though I was a Buds instructor in 1990, this is 2011, and things had changed. I mean, when you graduated Buds, you didn't go to a SEAL team. You actually go from basic underwater demolition team to what they call SEAL qualification training. And now, when I went through budget, it was 6 months. When I went through budget, it was 6 months. Now it's only 5 months. But SQT, the SEAL qualification training, is 7 months long. So they basically spend a year in training before they get to a SEAL team. And they get a lot of really good training too, a lot more than I even could imagine back when I went through. So that's kind of what I did in the teams, just to give you guys all a heads up. And now I'll kind of, what do I have for time? What do we have? What is this, an hour?
It's got a half an hour.
A half hour. I don't want to bore you guys for a half hour, but I'm going to talk more. Oh, go ahead, sir.
What's your attrition rate?
The attrition rate, so it wavers between about 75 and 80% do not, so about 20% make it through buds. And I think that was, if I look, I mean, you hear guys that had very big classes. I think my class probably started out with about 55 people, and we ended up with 15. And one guy was actually rolled into it, so a total of 14. So it's probably been pretty consistent throughout the years. It may ebb and flow a little bit. And usually when you would have any program in anything, if you had attrition rate of over 80%, they'd like shut this program down. But what you have to realize is what we do for the Navy is that all the people that we bring to buds, we're bringing, they have to be smarter because they have to have a high IQ and ASVAB score. They're going to be physically fit. So whatever person washes out of buds going through training, they just feed the fleet. So now they get probably a pretty high quality guy that goes out to the fleet that's smart and in shape, and hopefully they can take what they've learned, what little they may have learned at buds, and pass it on to the people that they're working with now on the ships or on the aircraft or wherever they're at. So that's why, you know, the Navy has never came down on spec war as a whole and say you need to fix your attrition, because it's a win-win for them no matter what happens. If we get them to be SEALs or if they go out somewhere else.
Part of the things that happened after Hell Week was, especially during the last couple of days, where you see a more robust time where people are ringing the bell to quit. The next phase right after Hell Week is usually dive phase. That's phase 2. And there's only so many dive rigs. So they kind of know when they're in the sweet spot, when they have their attrition down at they've been doing this so long, they know about how people are going to endure the training. You have to be able to figure out how long can you endure being cold, how long can you endure being wet, and then constant exercise and not getting injured during the whole process, because that's a setback as well. And then they want to see something, I guess I'll just call it heart. They want to know, do you really have heart, where you've decided in your mind you will not quit. You'd rather just pass out than quit. And when they find those people, that's how the 20% kind of comes out of the end of Hell Week. And then in the dive phase, and that's where they learn all about the diving, the different metrics of how to do combat diving, which isn't always deep diving. It's usually like about 30 feet of underwater for combat swimming. And then comes land phase, which is the last phase, and then there's other special things that they add into that the demo phase toward. And that's what makes the basic underwater demolition school about 6 or 7 months. It just takes that long to load it in. And one of the reasons why it takes that long, it's really about a year and a half of learning, but they like to compress it because they find that if they can compress the training into short periods, then you are learning under stress, and that's also training you to learn and absorb new data, new information under stress.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, and for the attrition, like on Hell Week, I mean, we've learned through years and years and years of doing this. I mean, so your first 2 days of Hell Week starts on a Sunday evening, and it usually ends on Friday afternoon. And I always like the nighttime because usually you can get more guys to quit when you have the day and the night, when you can start telling them night's coming and you're gonna freeze, that kind of digs into some of the people like, yeah, maybe I don't want to spend tonight running around with a boat on my head. So what happens is the first night is very hard, and you're getting them cold and wet, and you're running them around really hard, and you're running around with a boat on their head for miles and miles, and the next one they'll do a 2-mile swim, and they'll do a 4-mile time run, and you'll do all the things that you can, because you have to do it early, because later on you have to take it. They don't know you're taking it easy on them, but you do take it easy on them, because you don't want to break them. So there's about 2 days of really hard, intense training. And then what we try to do is we do longer evolutions. We make them paddle basically around the whole San Diego Bay. So, I mean, it may take 8 to 10 hours, but really and truly, what we're doing is we're getting them back off their feet. We're putting them in the boat, and they're just paddling. And I mean, this is usually day 3 or day 4. So we're trying to, we realize at this point, the guys, if they have made it to Wednesday, they're not going to quit. And so you could do whatever you want. You could make them do another run, another swim, but you're just going to risk injury, or you're going to get somebody with pneumonia or something. But you let them take it. You take them off their feet. You give them, they don't know they're getting a break, but we're giving them a break. And the hardest thing about the whole thing, too, is you're not getting any sleep. You know, you truly aren't. You're getting maybe an hour here and an hour there, a total of maybe 4 hours for the whole week. So that's the tough thing. I was fortunate. You hear stories of guys lost their hair. I lost my hair to old age, but they lost their fingernails, you know, and they had rashes and they had chafing in their legs. I was fortunate. I made it through pretty pain-free and injury-free, so I was lucky. But it's when you're 19, you're a little bit more bulletproof than you are today. But yeah, for the attrition. Go ahead, sir.
You talked about in the winter, it's cold and you're wet. In the summer, was sunburn a problem?
You know, it was. You're absolutely right. It was to a degree. I mean, you are always wearing a hat and you're always in green fatigues that are covering you. But yeah, your face and your head. The thing is you're cold and wet on summer, winter, it doesn't really matter. But it's just, you know, the temperature in the water in the winter is probably 57. And in the summertime, it may get to the mid-60s, upper 60s. I mean, it never gets really warm there. But when you have, you know, 14 hours of sun vice 7 hours of sun, there's a difference. And that's kind of where, you know, it makes it harder. But I do think the cold water does help in some degrees with the inflammation and some of your injuries, because you are exposed to cold. You're not as vulnerable as I think you are in the summertime, where guys do get, you know, more infections and things like that. Yes, sir?
Does the SEAL program accept women?
I mean, it's available. I think there's only been one so far that has tried, never got to first phase, but it's available now, right now, but there's nobody that's gone through it. Okay, young man? What?
Through the 18 classes you graduated, were you able to reconnect with any of those 250, 300 SEALs in your supporting role?
So, to give you an example, because, I looked at myself, I realized, maybe not when I was young, when I was an instructor, I didn't realize it, because in first phase, you are kind of the hammer instructor. But as time go by, and you know, I was fair though. I wasn't like just this guy that every time they saw me, they're going to be mean. So when I retired, you know, basically, you know, 30-some years later, every one of my side boys, I have a son that's a SEAL. Beside my son, every one of my side boys was a guy that I put through BUD/S. So yeah, I mean, obviously we became friends. You know, I became friends and teammates with a lot of guys that I put through BUD/S. So yeah, it's a good evolution that we have. Yes, sir. There's one guy back.
BUD/S, what's the age? 18 to 23 on average? And it sounds to me like you were no longer a dog kicker when you were 35, 40.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, some people can do it a little bit longer. You know, after 21 years, you know, about 20 years, it was probably like 18 when I started. Like, that's when I went and wore it. You know, I realized things weren't happening. You know, you can only train to go to war so many times, so many years. So, yeah, so about 18. And I think most guys, it's probably about the same thing. I mean, you can retire at 20. But
most of the guys are under 25 going through buds.
So right now, it's a little bit different today. I would say that probably most of them are. What's different today than when I went through, I would say 70% of the enlisted kids have degrees. So they're already 22, 23 years old. So I don't see, there are some that go through that are younger, but I bet you that the average age now is probably closer to 23 to 25. But you still have some younger ones, but yeah, you find a lot of them have degrees, and the reason why they don't want to, it's even harder to become an officer in the SEAL teams, but a lot of guys, they don't want to be the pencil pusher, what they'll say, or they don't want to be the administrator, they want to be the guy that's doing the shooting. So that's why they look at different career paths. Yes, sir.
What is the training like for the all system SEALs?
Exactly the same.
Same training?
Exact same training.
Train together.
There's no difference. They go through everything. The only thing that's different is when so like I told you, they go through buds now. And like, it's a little bit shorter because they don't, like when I went through, we did stuff like cast and recovery and things that we did that we no longer do. So they took a lot of the stuff out. I dove 3 different dive rigs. They only dive 1, or with open circuit, and they dive the dragger. So things have cut that back, but they're going to add it on during the SEAL qualification training. So what happens to the officers, and I'd get into this in the brief and show you, but I can't because it's not on the board, is so once they graduate buds, the officers, what they do is they send them through a 6 weeks officer course. It's a leadership course. But what that does is it pulls them from their buds class, reloads them, and then when they're done with that course, they pick up another class. So they don't know they may know a little bit about each guy, but they don't know them. So it's just another leadership challenge for them. Now they're working for the next 6 months with 30 guys they really barely know. So it's a good program in the sense that they take them out, they teach them specifically officer stuff, but then they reload them back with another group of SEALs. And they're all A personality guys, and they're, everyone wants to beat each other up, and everything's a competition.
How long is the usual guy in this? How long is this study? 6 years?
I mean, I think the commitment is 6 years right
Enlisted,
now
yeah.
for an enlisted guy. I would say, for the most part, I mean, a lot. I don't know. I think back in the early days, there was probably guys would do their 4 years. Probably a third of them would do their 4 years and get out. It may be that. Maybe it's a little bit more. I think guys go to do their 6 to 10 years. That's probably about 50% now, and then the rest do at least 20 years. I would say. Even though one of my sons has a buddy that's doing like 16 years, he's almost has 16 years and he's getting out. So I was like, I don't know why he's doing that, but to each his own. But
Yeah. For the officers, it's 2 years as an ensign, 2 years as a lieutenant JG, and 6 years as a lieutenant. So that's a 10-year window right there. Generally, as a lieutenant, there'll be an assistant officer in charge of a platoon, and then an officer in charge of a platoon. Then after they've had their OIC tour, then they usually are close to like transitioning into another kind of they want to be in a leadership role or a staff role or something else. And so the officer career path is more management after they've already had their OIC role. Whereas if you're enlisted, you're always with the platoon, you're always deploying and shooting and running and gunning and jumping and diving and splashing. So.
I'll get right to you, sir. In around 10 years for the officers, that's usually where you see those guys leave and get out. Because they don't want to fill those XO jobs and stuff like that, become more administrative. They want to do SEAL stuff for as long as they can, and then they find other places to go and do great things.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Is the Naval Academy a major feeder to this?
It is more so now than it was in the earlier days. And when I went through BUDS, you couldn't go to the Naval Academy and go to BUDS. Because I had 2 class officers that were there, and they both were Naval Academy guys. They were lieutenants. They already had 4 years in before they go to BUDS. Today, I think it probably, I'm not saying half, but it's pretty close to half probably come from the Naval Academy than, ROTCs and OCS. But it's very, very demanding. And even within the Naval Academy, they have their own kind of selection there for the guys going to Bud. So they're getting a double whammy.
How many Navy SEALs are there today?
See, I mean, I think it's about 2,000, maybe that much. I mean, my wife asked that question the other day. We looked it up. I think at any one given time, but I think it's around 2,000, 2,500 max.
And in a SEAL team, they're not all SEALs. So there'll be some people who are in a support role with SEAL teams that do either supply and logistics, or they do transportation, like driving the boats that deliver them and extract them from different missions. They're not SEALs, but they're special warfare qualified individuals for those particular missions. Sometimes a corpsman will go down to Fort Sam Houston, become an 18 Delta Special Forces medical technician. So they're kind of like having a paramedic in your platoon.
Yeah, very good. There's 1 minute. Go ahead, ma'am.
How is the decision made, or who makes the decision to assign a SEAL team to a mission? How does that work out? And then, so they say, "Look, we need the SEALs to deal with this." Who does the planning? How does that work?
So, I mean, it depends. I mean, so obviously you've heard of SEAL Team 6, so they work for a different commander. And they work for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and you're basically, they're getting their orders from the president. It's usually a very important mission. For most of the other SEAL teams, and with the guys SEAL team, it's wherever you're at, like each theater, if you're in the Pacific, you have a Pacific commander. And when you leave the United States as a SEAL team and you go deploy, you fall under that geographical commander. So he owns you in a way. So, and that's what makes, I mean, they kind of give you the direction and the decisions. Like what happened in Afghanistan, I mean, there was multiple, competing forces. Army and, obviously Navy's basically only Navy SEALs, but then you had, the Marines. So, you competed because even within Afghanistan, you had regions that were controlled by different commanders, and they found out who the most valuable people were they wanted to get, and that rose to the top, and that's who you would target that night. So we're never going to talk about the museum tonight, I don't think. Go ahead, sir. Okay.
I have a rather simple question, but the answer might not be as simple. But is there any special training for that person who has the worst job in the Navy? The Navy wife?
She said plenty of training.
On-the-job training.
So, I could tell you a story about how wonderful my wife is, but she's been in it since Panama. So, since 1989. And watched our kids from then, and then she's put up with all this stuff. Cheryl, what's the training you get?
You don't think about it, you just do it.
There you go, simple. That's what I do half of my life. Just do it. Yes, ma'am?
Do you know the status of the current missing SEALs, the 2 SEALs that are missing? Do you know anything about?
So,
I haven't listened to the news since.
and I still don't think they have found them. So what they were doing, they were boarding a ship at sea, at night, in rough seas. And that's definitely probably the hardest, it's one of the hardest jobs that we do, is doing that. A lot of times it's not always, shooting the bad guys the hard job. It's getting to get where the bad guys are. It can be, jumping from 25,000 feet and then patrolling for 10 kilometers to get to this person. So that's sometimes that people forget. They think it's the hard parts from when you're getting shot at and shooting somebody. Sometimes just getting there. So climbing a ship at night and what they were doing is very difficult. And It's tragic what happened to them. It's probably going to be hard. That sometimes they have a lot of equipment on them, so when they do go in the ocean, they should be neutrally balanced. But did they get knocked out when they hit the water? You know, did they hit the boat going into the water? So there's a lot of variables that we don't know. But I mean, yet they haven't found him, and I think at this point where that was at, we're probably not going to find him. So yeah, it's horrible. Go ahead, Lee. I'm sorry. I have passed you up 100 times.
We have a granddaughter who 2 years ago, before eventually going to the Naval Academy, she, 2 years ago, asked her, what's her ambition? She wanted to be the first Navy SEAL woman. She's captain of 3 teams in high school, and going to the Naval Academy next season. What's your recommendation if she still wants to pursue that? I mean, it's so hard, as Gary and I talked, it's a physical problem. Is there a role for women you see in the future in the SEALs, different than men?
I mean, I think there's plenty of women that are out there, because we see them, you know, they're the CrossFit girls, that are strong enough to do it, you know. I mean, any Olympic swimmer could, you know, physically do it. I think it's more the mental piece than it is the physical piece for some of the women. Because there are some beasts out there that are women that make me look like a shrimp, you know. I mean, there's just some amazing ladies that are out there. So physically, I think absolutely. The mental piece, you know, being the wet and the dirty and the muddy and not getting to sleep, and that's going to be the hard piece for her. That would be my thing, was like, think about that. And I think what I try to tell everybody, especially young kids, like I get a kid that's 12 years old and he goes, I want to be a SEAL, and I go, you know what, just be a kid until you're 18. You know, don't worry about being a SEAL now. You don't worry about that, because you want to have fun. And then when I get guys that are at BUD/S, I say, today I think they think about the end game. I'm going to graduate in a year and a half or whatever it is, you know. They're not thinking about BUD/S, that training's day by day. Just take it. You're going to get fed 3 times a day. You know, sometimes in hell we get fed 4 times. You're in a barracks room that is literally on the Pacific Ocean, and you can hear the waves crashing every night. So, I mean, there are some positives too, the hardness of it. So, and if you think about, you know, week 1, you know, day 4, and you're worried about graduating a year down the road, that's going to be overwhelming. You can't think that far. Just think and that's what I'd say, you know, just take it day by day, you know.
And speaking of having fun as a kid, let's talk about how fun it is to visit the Navy SEAL Museum. And just talk about some of the artifacts and the displays. And
so, just so everybody knows, and I can't show you, I'm going to have to use some of these slides just to give myself some historical verification. So just first and foremost, how many people have been to the Navy SEAL Museum?
oh, look at that.
Oh, look at that.
We've got
So
a great crowd.
So you already know half the stuff I'm going to say. And actually, I've got 2 magazines that I've left with Gary, or I will give Gary before I leave. And it's really, it's like a coffee book table. And it's basically a museum and a magazine. So hopefully you can leave it at the clubhouse or something, or just pass it around. So, but it's good. So first and foremost, the Navy SEAL Museum, it's a 501c3. So we do not get any government funding at all. And so it's all, you know, it's through donations, it's through admissions, and we do a lot of fundraising to keep that place going. And then as we get later in, you know, we want to expand a little bit. We want to bring some of the artifacts, you know, make some things more modern, maybe make some of it more interactive. So, I mean, you always want to better it. So, but we are, like I said, we're a 501c3. So we do not get any funding. Like people go, oh, you get the government pays for this. We don't. We don't get anything from the government, just so you know, which is probably a good thing. Because you get tied with the government, becomes bureaucracy, and they probably create more work for us. So, like they do everything else. So I'm just going to read something that's kind of the mission statement from the museum, and this is kind of what we, you know, try to pass on to everybody that we meet and talk. So, I mean, the National Navy SEAL Museum is the only museum dedicated solely to preserving the history of the United States Navy SEALs and their predecessors. Located in Fort Pierce, Florida, the museum resides on the training grounds of the original Navy combat divers, the Frogmen. They were Navy combat demolition units, that's what they were. And that's where they trained, right on the beaches, right there in Fort Pierce, for the D-Day landing, Normandy. Built to honor the men who served with fortitude and dedication, the Navy SEAL Museum first opened its doors on Veterans Day in 1985. From humble beginnings, the facility has experienced tremendous growth, achieving national stature in 2007. The main objective of the museum remains the promotion of public education by providing the opportunity to explore the history of the United States Navy SEALs through interactive exhibits, while honoring the fallen at the Navy SEAL Memorial and caring for those warriors' families through the Trident House charity programs. So I had a video for that, and I don't have that now because it's on this computer, and I can't pass the computer around to everybody. So that's kind of, I mean, that's our focus. We want to make sure that our guys aren't forgotten. And I think one of our things that we get overlooked is we look what's going on in a lot of public schools today. And it's not exactly what we want our kids being taught. But I think when you go to a museum like the Navy SEAL Museum, it shows kids, you know, if you work hard, you can be successful. You know, it talks about, you know, integrity and honor and just courage, things that a lot of times I don't think they teach at schools. So a lot of times these type of history museums are something that is important. So, and we do see a lot of kids that go through there, and there's a lot of schools that bring their kids there, and we have the ROTC kids that come. So it truly is great. And I think somebody was asking me when I first came in here today, she's the lady that's working up at the front of the restaurant, and she has her son that's 12 and her daughter's 14. She goes, is it a good place for the kids? I go, absolutely, it's the greatest place. Because they can spend 5 hours on that obstacle course that you guys have seen if you've been there, and they can run around all day long and bring them home tired. So that's kind of it. So yes, and a lot of people always ask, why is it in Fort Pierce? Even team guys ask that. So, and like I just said, that is the original place where our predecessors started. Go ahead, sir.
Glenn, can you talk about Trident House?
I can.
Thank you.
So, all right,
You mentioned.
so what?
Question was about Trident House.
And I have this thing that okay, I stopped it right there. So the Trident House, so now we have two. So within the museum, we have kind of like 3 other pillars, and it's kind of like the museum teaches everybody about the Navy SEALs and their history, and then we have things that take care of and helps the families and some of the SEAL guys that we have. We have a Trident House, and it is basically right across the street from the museum, and it's what it's used for, and it's on the intercoastal waterway. It's used for like people that are coming off of deployment, families, SEALs, a lot of Gold Star families. They'll come here and they can spend a week. It's completely free. They get to do whatever they want. They can drive right across to the beach and to the museum because they're right next to it. And it's awesome. And then recently we had purchased a condominium, which is just 6 miles north in Vero Beach, and this provides the same exact thing. You know, because we had such a demand on the house from people wanting to stay, you know, we had to find another place, another location that we could purchase. And that's hard to do because, like in condominiums, they don't want to have, it's like an Airbnb, people think of it as, because people are coming in 1 week at a time. Well, we happened to find the perfect spot that allowed that, and it actually worked out that we found this condominium, and it's on the water, on a marina, in Vero Beach, and it's the exact same thing. It's open to any SEAL, their families, and then, like, I think the majority of people that I've seen that have stayed there are the Gold Star families. They'll come down and just relax and get together, you know, with their families, and there's no worry there at all. They just show up and everything's waiting for them. Have you stayed there? Not yet. The Trident House, have you stayed? Have you ever been to it? Okay. So it's nice. It's nice. So, and then on top of the Trident House that we provide the guys, we have a dog program. And we can use multiple different dog groups. I mean, there's so many veteran groups that provide dogs for people. And what we do is we have collected funds, and what we'll do is we'll pay for a dog, depending on who it's from, or what it's from, or what the person wants, and it will be completely trained for these guys, and they can take that dog. And I mean, as you'll see, a lot of guys find that peace, sometimes the dog brings that peace back to the person. It makes them feel wanted, I guess, when some of the guys have the stresses that have been going on, or they have, it kind of gets them up and gets them moving. The dog will do that too. But it's just a great program that provides well-trained, and I'm not saying they're completely service dogs like a handicapped person, but they're dogs that are like more or less emotional support dogs, and they can be of any kind. So that's the one other program. We have a scholarship program that we provide for lots of students, who are the benefactors are two very nice person that provided the Hill, what was it, the Margie Foundation. Our daughter actually got some of these scholarships back in the day. And then the last thing we do is called family support. So sometimes there's things that, you know, the government can't pay for because the person may be out and there's a handicap issue, or they need something fixed in their house and they can't afford it. It helps pay some medical bills for some of the guys. It's just kind of a fun that if it goes through the process and we look at it and it looks like this person is worthy and it makes a lot of sense to us, then we'll provide them the funding to do that. So outside of the museum being a museum, it also is a contributor back to the community, or especially our community.
It's a living, breathing organization. You can come and visit, see all the different artifacts that have been collected as far back as World War II. The special warfare actually started in 1943 during the Battle of Tarawa, when certain Marine landing craft exploded or got beached on the coral reefs, and so the Navy said we need people to go out and do underwater reconnaissance to find out where are the safe ways to enter into to do a beach landing. And then from the 60s and from the Vietnam War, various artifacts, various weapons and how they have evolved over the years, from the conventional, like an old Stoner from 1965, to the modern Barrett 50 cal and the M16. These are different weapons that we use, and that H&K, MP4, MP9. These are the things that they have those on view. You can see they have videos that you can see of different vignettes from different aspects. If you remember the ship, the Maersk Alabama, with Captain Phillips from the movie, Captain Phillips, well, the actual lifeboat from that movie, from the ship is there. You can get right up and see inside where the sniper shot was taken.
And you can see the bullet holes, just so you know.
Yeah.
Has Captain Phillips come to the museum?
He does, and we do a lot of fundraising with Captain Phillips. Rich Phillips is a really great patriot. He truly is. He's very supportive. So, I mean, I'm not gonna go through this whole brief or the whole thing since we've started so late. But there's sometimes, like the Maersk Alabama, there's stories within the stories. And I'm gonna give you, if you've been to the museum, you've seen the Vietnam venue that we have. It's not big, but it's like, a couple guys patrolling. One guy has this shotgun. He's a point man. The guy's name is Patches Watson, and Patches was one of the directors years ago. And he was a Vietnam SEAL, and he was the point man. And he actually wrote a book called Point Man. And Patches had a duck bill on the end of his shotgun, so when you shoot a shotgun, when it has a circle, it just sprays all the shells or all the pellets in one direction. So when you do a duckbill, it makes it so the line, the shotgun shells or the pellets come out in a straight line. And this is the way he could take down the jungle in front of him, but it gave him a wider berth to shoot more people. So if you ever go to the museum and you look at that artifact, if you look at the AK-47 that's on the ground, you can see the pellets in the buttstock and in the magazine. Well, that's from Patch's shotgun that's also on display there, and that's the weapon that he shot and killed this North Vietnamese young man. And the crazy thing of the whole thing is this person that he shot was equivalent to a Medal of Honor winner of us. So this North Vietnamese guy that he killed was one of their heroes. So unfortunately, no matter what side you're on, there's a lot of heroes on both sides. But this is what happens to be. That's one of those unique stories. And then I'll just, on artifacts, so we have one that, it's not on display now, but it will be probably in the next couple of months. So if you have been there and you haven't seen it, so it's a story about a guy named Mike Day. And I'm not sure if you heard that. So this is a young man in 2007, was in Iraq, went in, #1 guy, and he was the boat crew leader, or he was the chief of the platoon. And he goes in, he gets blown down, basically by grenades and bullet fire, and gets knocked unconscious. He wakes up with 3 Iraqis over top of him shooting at him. I mean, shooting at him point blank. And he doesn't have his primary gun because they got knocked out. He picks up his pistol and he shoots all 3 of them and kills them. Even though he's been shot. He's been shot 27 times. But obviously a lot of that was in his body armor, in ballistics. So, but I mean, so that artifact of his body armor and his ballistic plates and his uniform and all the pellets they took off will be in the museum in a couple of months. That's what we're working on right now. And the saddest thing about that is Mike Day took his own life about 8 months ago. Yep. Here's a guy that survived all that, but just couldn't, survive the other wounds. But yeah, incredible. He has a book, it's called Perfectly Wounded. So I'm reading up on that so we make sure that whatever we put inside the information on the artifact is correct. So that's something new. If you have been to the museum, that will be something that we'll have soon.
That's a great tease. Glenn, we want to thank you so much for your presentation tonight.
Thank you guys, everybody.
Please go up and join and see the Navy SEAL Museum at your leisure sometime in the near future. I know you'll enjoy it. Thank you very much. Good night now.
And let them know you're from Mariner Sands.